picked the abandoned aquarium because it was supposed to be simple. In, a few photos. Out. The back lot was overgrown and the sea wind pushed salt through broken vents. I used a headlamp and kept my steps slow so I wouldn't trip on glass. Inside, the lobby smelled like old algae and damp drywall. A faded map still pointed to exhibits that were long gone. At the end of the hall, the shark tunnel's curved glass caught my light. Then a wet handprint appeared on the inside, right where my beam landed. I froze and listened for a leak, but there was no dripping anywhere. The handprint slid downward in one smooth streak, like something heavy had leaned and pulled away. I backed up, and my breath fogged the glass even though it felt too cold for that. I told myself it was condensation and moved toward the staff corridor for a quicker exit. The door back there had a card reader with a dead screen, but it was already slightly ajar. When I nudged it, the gap widened like it had been waiting for a push. The staff corridor ran behind the tanks, narrow and littered with hoses and tags. I followed the daylight glow toward an emergency exit sign, but the sign led to a wall of stacked plastic barriers. Behind me, a soft slap echoed, bare skin on wet tile, one step at a time. I turned my headlamp toward the sound and caught a figure at the corridor's far end. It was tall and slick-looking, like it had crawled out of a tank, shoulders hunched to fit the space. Its face was pressed close to the wall, as if it was smelling the paint. It lifted its head and met my eyes with pale, lidless focus. Then it moved. Fast, quiet, a sudden glide that made the corridor feel too small. I ran, and the slap of its step stayed right behind mine, perfectly timed like it was matching me. I slammed into a side door and threw my shoulder into it until the latch cracked. The room beyond was a maintenance bay with a broken roll-up door, just high enough to crawl under. I scraped my elbows on concrete and slid out into the back lot, not stopping until I hit the fence line. When I finally looked back, the aquarium's side door was open wider than before. The figure stood in the doorway, still wet, head tilted like it was listening to my heartbeat from across the lot. My headlamp beam shook on its face, and a fresh handprint bloomed on the outside of the glass beside it, as if it had already crossed over. The ski lodge had burned years ago, and what remained sat blackened against the tree line. I went at midday because I didn't want shadows to do the work for my nerves. Snowmelt trickled under the warped front doors, and my phone screen was my only steady light inside. The main hall was gutted, but the front desk was still there like a stubborn tooth. A tarnished service bell sat on the counter, dust-caked and tilted. As I leaned in to photograph it, the bell rang once, clean and sharp, without my hand touching it. I jerked back so hard my shoulder hit a charred pillar. The bell didn't wobble or settle like it had been struck. It just sat there, innocent. Then a second ring sounded from upstairs, the same bell tone, like an answer. The staircase had missing steps, so I climbed carefully along the edge. The upper hallway was lined with doors, most of them swollen shut from heat and water. One door stood open a few inches, and warm air breathed out of it in a slow pulse. I tried the hall behind me, but the way I'd come was now blocked by a collapsed beam I didn't remember seeing. The wood creaked above my head, and something dragged across carpet in the room with the warm air. My phone screen dimmed on its own, like it was trying to look away. I pushed the cracked door wider and saw room 12 on a plaque hanging crooked. A figure sat on the far bed frame back toward me, perfectly still in a soot-stained coat. Its head was turned just enough that I could see one pale cheek, too smooth against the burned room. I whispered without meaning to, and the figure's shoulders rose as if it inhaled my voice. It stood in one motion and faced me, and I realized it wasn't wearing a coat at all. It was wrapped in something that looked like ash stuck to wet skin. It stepped toward the doorway, and the air turned thick, like breathing through cloth. I stumbled backward, felt for the hall, and bolted the only direction left. The floor dipped, a board snapped, and I went down hard, sliding on splinters toward the staircase landing. Behind me, the bell rang again, right in my ear, followed by fast footfalls that weren't mine. I didn't stand, I crawled, then half fell down the stairs, scraping my palms raw. I hit the front doors and shoved until they gave, spilling into cold daylight like it was water. When I looked back up at the second floor window of room 12, the figure filled the frame, pressed close, while the service bell on the desk below rang by itself in a steady rhythm, as if it had found my trail. The desert observatory was miles from anything, a low complex of sun-bleached buildings beside a fenced dish field. I chose the smaller control annex because it looked less exposed than the main dome. I clipped a small bike light to my jacket and stepped through a door that sighed open on grit. Inside, the air tasted like dust and old electronics. A row of desks faced a wall of dark monitors, each one spider-webbed with cracks. On one desk sat a reel-to-reel tape recorder, its reels empty until they twitched and began to turn. A thin voice came through the recorder's speaker, quiet but close, like someone talking from inside a vent. It wasn't static, it was words I couldn't make out, with pauses that sounded like listening. Then, the recorder clicked, and the voice stopped exactly when I held my breath. I backed away and aimed my bike light at the door, but the metal latch had swung into place on its own. The handle still moved, but the door wouldn't open more than a finger's width. Behind me, one monitor lit up in a sick green glow, showing a camera view of the room I was standing in. On the screen, I watched myself turn, a half-second delayed, but in the corner of that video frame a second shape stood behind the desks, too tall, too thin, with a head that didn't match any angle in the room. When I spun around for real, there was nothing there. I stepped closer to the desks, eyes flicking between reality and the monitor. The shape was still on screen, clearer now, as if the camera liked it better than my eyes did. It lifted an arm toward my back, and I felt a cold fingertip touch my shoulder at the exact moment the screen hand reached me. I whirled and saw it for real, right beside the tape machine, inches from my face. Its skin looked like stretched paper over wire, and its mouth was a narrow split that opened without sound. It leaned in, and the smell was wrong, like hot plastic and rain in the same breath. I shoved a chair into it and sprinted for the door, throwing my weight against the latch. The latch didn't move, but the tape recorder clicked and rewound with a furious whir, like it was yanking time backward. The door popped free on the rewind's final snap, and I crashed out into the blinding sun. I ran across the gravel until the annex was a white box behind me. When I finally stopped and looked back, the annex door was shut and the tiny window was dark. Then my bike light, still clipped to my jacket, blinked once, and in that single flash I saw the figure standing beside me in my own shadow on the ground, perfectly aligned, as if it had never been left behind at all.